And welcome to another episode of the Speak for Yourself podcast. My name is Casey, and I'm so glad that you're here. I have two guests tonight, and I'm going to bring them in. Hello, hello. We have PJ and Abby from the Conspiracy Pilled podcast. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Nobody
Doing
asked
great.
you.
Oh, that's fair.
Hey,
you see what I have to work with? You see what I have to work with?
I was just complimenting PJ on his background. I'm kind of a guitar player myself, so
Nice.
I dig all the guitars and all that jazz.
Nice.
What kind of music do you play?
So I was in a few different metal bands back in the day, and I was actually a vocalist in most of them, but I played bass sometimes, and I play a little bit of everything. But yeah, so mostly metal music.
Awesome. Abby, do you play music at all?
I play the radio.
Play the radio. There you go.
Like a
I'm really
champ.
good at it. Yep.
Always say I have a face for radio. So
Hey, me too. I have a face for radio and a voice for TV. I don't know what that means. So
yeah, there you go.
oh.
Well, I think I found you guys first by I believe Abby had like a pro-life tweet, and I just saw her, and then I guess because of the algorithm, PJ, you shortly followed on my feed, like
Probably.
like in the same.
I'm grabbing
setting.
Abby's coattails as far as Twitter goes, and I'm not even ashamed of it.
But yeah, so I found you all that way, and then I found out you had a conspiracy podcast, and so I dug in a little bit of that and ended up digging it. It's always nice to find out that there's some other people that are like-minded and enjoy similar things, so that was a nice thing to find out.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because that's one of the things that people say to us a lot. Is like, I feel like a lot of conspiracy podcasts, they try really hard to be like, well, I don't want to give my opinion. I just want to give you the details, and you make up your own mind. And I think us just being more honest about who we are and what we think and believe has been, well, we lose people, obviously, but I think that the people who stick around really appreciate it.
So I want to talk about that a little bit first. So how did you guys meet, and how did you start the podcast?
Twitter.
Yeah, I was going to say Twitter at some point. Yeah, I don't really know exactly when we started following each other on Twitter, but I do remember it must have been after the Roe v. Wade stuff that I'd asked Abby to come on a different podcast I was doing last year called Wartime Propaganda. And it was like, we didn't really know each other at all. And then we did this one podcast together, and it was like the next day we're like starting plans to do Conspiracy Pilled. So it's kind of interesting.
Was your other one more politically geared?
Yeah. So that one, it was basically, I was like twice a week, just kind of covering the news and bringing people on and talking about politics.
Gotcha. And how long have y'all been doing Conspiracy Pilled?
Since September of 2022.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, because we talked about
hey
it
guys,
for.
I actually made y'all guys something, so give me 1 sec.
Okay.
Oh, no problem.
I'm scared. Yes.
I love it.
I love it.
I don't know
so
if you
much.
can see it really well, but we got the tinfoil hat. I actually tried decking out the whole hat in it, and it is harder than you think to fit around the top and then make it fit on your head.
You know how there's those places that like literally sell duct tape wallets and stuff like that? We need to find a manufacturer that can make like tinfoil hats.
There you go.
That are more than just like a Hershey's Kiss, but like an actual hat.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had this idea like last minute, and it was incredibly hard to get it around the top and to stick and all that. So I just went with the bill.
I like it. It looks good on the bill.
It's enough tinfoil. It is just enough to protect you from whatever it is that you're
5G, Jewish space lasers, whatever your choice.
Well, so going back to your podcast, one of the things that I enjoy about it is we have, or y'all have, conspiracy theories that have come true and that are more, I guess, grounded is a better is the term for it. And then you have some that are far out there that maybe are more for fun, that sort of thing. And that's kind of how I view conspiracy theories in the whole. Is that how y'all approach it, or what is your thinking behind that?
Okay, so our whole thing is like we're mostly hinged, slightly more hinged than Alex Jones, and that hinge is like that one hinge is Jesus, is that we stay grounded in our faith so that we're able to not kind of, I think a lot of people who get into conspiracies kind of go crazy. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Something
it's easy to do, and you said like some have come true. That's where it's easiest to do, is you start seeing the lies and things get exposed, and you're like, oh wow, a lot of the things I grew up believing are bull crap. And then you start, I don't know, some people start like thinking every single thing ever is a lie, and it just becomes this like spiral, I guess. So yeah, that's what, the last hinge we try to hold on to. And I think the more that we try, we understand our faith better, the more that it lines up with our worldview without even trying. Like there's times where it's like, oh man, I'm not really sure how this fits in with like my faith and stuff like that. And then something will come up like the instance I love to give is like a worldwide flood theory, right? Which Graham Hancock has shown proof of, and we've talked about. And it was always weird to me because I was like, well, there's not enough water on the earth to flood the earth to the mountaintops. Like that's not a thing. So how does that make any sense? And then we found out that there's 3 times as much water underneath the surface of the earth, like in the near the core. And that if it had shot up through geysers, it would literally have covered the earth to the mountains. So like, science is like behind the Bible in that way. I find very interesting.
Yeah, in preparation for today, I literally listened to the one that you had with man, what is his name?
Was it Alan?
No, the satire.
Seth Dillon.
Seth Dillon.
Seth Dillon. Man, it was on the tip of my tongue. Yeah.
And
y'all kind of hinted on the flood theory a little bit.
Yeah.
And you're asking him about that. And one of the interesting things you tied it into atheism, and like what they believe and what they, if they have a lack of faith or whatever. And as far as like tying it to the flood, they're blaming or attributing it to different things, like anything other than attributing it to biblical accuracy,
And it's funny because
even
when it gets into the realm of supernatural, where you start seeing things in the Bible that are coming true, that it's like, that's outside of our understanding of science. They're always trying to find something else. So it either has to be aliens or Anunnaki or simulation theory, but it can never be God, in the mainstream. So I think people are starting to realize the same stuff that we're talking about and realizing, but they're rushing to find some attribution that makes them not have to accept that reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that I really like is, and this is just one of those things, the same time period that I found your podcast and both of you really, I was actually doing a Revelation study, and I'm not finished because I kind of got off track. But I open up Spotify and I'm scrolling through y'all's episode log, and you have a Revelation study that you've been doing, which I thought was very interesting. So what led y'all to doing that as openly as you've done it in all like podcast form, as opposed to just doing it on your own or together or whatever?
I feel like this was Abby's idea. Do you remember how this came about? Or
so much of what we do, any part of the podcast, is like, I feel like I should do this today. Even to the extent of saying, I had this episode planned, but I feel like I should change it the day of, PJ.
Yeah, done it.
So definitely Revelation was something that was heavy on our minds for a while. And we were like, you know what? There's a verse in the very beginning that says, blessed are you who read this out loud. There's just a blessing right in the front. So we were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's read it out loud.
It's like those who read it and then those who hear it.
Who hear it as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's read it out loud on a podcast. Then more people can have the blessing of hearing it, and we can have the blessing of reading it and just talk about it, because there's so much that's going on in the world. And we were just like, I don't want to be influenced by all the study. I just want to read it and see what, how sometimes you can just kind of get lost in the academia of it, and you just have to read something and just look straight at it and be like, this is a tree.
It's a good point, because sometimes, like in the preparation for it, I was listening. Revelation was one of the books of the Bible I kind of avoided most of my life. I was like, that's so confusing. And I read through it once and I was like, maybe I'll just leave that alone and I'll stick with that verse that everybody repeats out of Matthew 24. You won't know the day or the hour. So that was good enough for me for the longest time. And then, so in preparation for it, I was listening to these different people talk about like, well, is it mid-trib or is it post-trib or is it post-mill or is it this? And it was so confusing to me. So then we just stripped that away and read it. And I felt like so much more of it made sense when you stripped away, like, you know, everybody trying to rationalize it and add, and it's weird. I don't know. It didn't seem as confusing to me by the time we got to the end as I thought it would, because I feel like academia has over confused this book.
Yeah, for sure. Have y'all found, has anything surprised you along this study? Like, have you changed your mind about anything, or do you think a different way about something that, you know, you might have been set in stone before you started this study?
I think we both have quite a few. For me, for instance, when people were asking us to read the Book of Enoch for a long time, and I was just under the impression, well, I'm like, well, the Book of Enoch's not in the Bible. It's not canonized, so therefore it must be a false gospel. And in college, I studied Gnosticism, and I studied the Gospel of Judas and both Gospels of Thomas and Gospel of Philip, and they're all very obviously a couple hundred years after Christianity trying to turn it into more of a Luciferian religion. And those were great deceptions in my mind. So I just had put Enoch in that category. And I didn't know that Enoch was written before Gnosticism and that it was referenced in 2 Peter and Jude. Jesus references it. And so when it was reading Enoch and studying it, I was like, oh, wow, this actually is how the New Testament authors thought of Genesis 6. This was their belief on Genesis 6. It's very obvious that Peter's saying that the Watchers existed and they were cast down to the pit of Tartarus. So that was a huge change of mind for me. I was very resistant to Enoch and what it said for a long time.
I think for the most part, my mind hasn't changed so much as just grown on certain things, or just small shifts, as opposed to really like I haven't gone from, oh, you know what? I did become a 9/11 truther.
Yep.
through this study?
I'm sorry, not I got off on a different
That was episode 2, I believe.
Yeah, so just through the podcast in general.
Oh,
but
okay.
as far as Revelation, just expanding knowledge. I think the only
we
thing
can go there too after this for sure.
I think the only thing through the podcast that I've just wildly changed my mind on is that. But sorry.
No, you're good. So how do you feel about the Nephilim, considering that you know, you didn't want to read Enoch before and now you have? Do you subscribe to that theory about the flood being sent to basically wipe out the Nephilim, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes the most sense to me. I've talked to
several
people
about that. It seems more obvious when you really understand what it's saying and when you are realizing how much the Nephilim are actually referenced later in the Bible, but like certain translations, they're like, oh, well, let's just change that word. Like they'll say Nephilim in some translations, then they'll just say giants later, but you don't realize the root word of giants is Nephilim or Anakim or Raphaim and all these other references. They'll even change Tartarus and references to Hades to just hell, even though they're very different, like Sheol, hell, Hades. They're all different. Like they use different words, and I think those words are important. So once you start understanding that, I think, you know, it says all flesh was corrupted. It seems to be talking about what Enoch is putting forth, that their flesh was literally corrupted through like DNA mutations and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like
there's so much about
stuff.
Yeah.
There's so much about the. I'm sorry. There's so much about the Bible that gets lost in translation. Nothing that's essential, like everything that's essential for doctrine, is there, and no matter what language you translate, it's there. And so people don't have to worry about that. But once you start looking into things and digging more into the language and considering different ways of looking at it, just a lot more opens up as far as just the details and understanding the context of things.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any idea why pastors tend to stray away from teaching Revelation at all? That's one of the things that's like really bothered me lately.
I have a theory about this, actually. I think that pastors have not just strayed away from Revelation. I think they've strayed away from anything supernatural.
Yes.
And it's odd to me because I was trying to explain this. I was talking to my wife about this. I'm like, I don't understand how, like, as a Christian, you believe that God made himself man, died, rose from the dead, and ascended to heaven. And that's acceptable and fine and whatever. But giants is a leap too far. Or, you know, like human animal hybrids is a leap too far.
Yeah. We can walk on water, but let's not talk about demons.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
for
weird,
sure.
man. I think that there's just been this stripping away of the spiritual. And it's like outside of the main thing that you have to believe to save yourself from hell, everything else supernatural and spiritual is just kind of, I don't know, it makes people uncomfortable, I guess, because I don't think that they really believe in a supernatural God in the way that they claim to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The only other thing that I could figure is just maybe, like the teaching of grace is like pretty straightforward, right? Everybody understands that as far as like pastors go. But there's like different variations and different like belief systems for belief sets on Revelation. So that's the only other thing that I could figure that they're just not comfortable teaching it because they don't really understand it.
Yeah, I think I also wonder if it's like people are too worried about coming off as a bit kooky. What was that verse that you found that you said was like basically our Bible verse for our show? Could you find that?
Oh yeah, let me look for it.
But yeah, I think a lot of it does come down to that. There's just like, well, I mean, it's already hard enough to get people to believe in like the resurrection of the dead and things like that. Let's not take it too far. But I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong to not. People are looking for something spiritual. I've been saying this for years. There's a reason why people call themselves spiritual and not religious. There's a reason why people are using tarot cards and reading astrology and using crystals and all this crap because they want something that's beyond the physical and they know that it exists. Everybody does. So when the church is failing to offer that solution, people turn to spiritualism, and that's where I think they like in their mind. I think a lot of people's mind, they're like, well, I don't want to be too weird. I want to, but they're wrong. I think people actually know that we are more than physical, and they're searching. So, did you find that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a. Do you have it, Abby?
Yeah. It's 2 Corinthians 5:13. For if we are beside ourselves, it is for God. If we are in our right minds, it is for you. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the one. And you told me it's like, you can kind of translate to this to, if you're unhinged, it's for God. And if we're totally hinged and trying to, be like, in the mainstream and not saying anything too weird, that's just for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that checks out.
I think so many people are afraid of looking foolish for saying something. But earlier you said, what if pastors are just not teaching on it because they're afraid that they don't understand it? You see pastors teaching all the time on things that they don't understand, and just getting it wildly wrong. And maybe they're not aware of it, and maybe you're right that they're afraid of revelation. But it seems like more so that they don't want to teach on something weird and uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think it's personally, I think it's a disservice to your congregation or just Christians in general to not teach Revelation, because when you know that, you can nearly view the world with like a biblical lens and like current and geopolitical events with a biblical lens, and things start making a little more sense, right? And you can kind of see the progression of where things are going. This is just my personal belief on that, but
that touches on the other thing that pastors are uncomfortable on speaking on, and that's politics. And I don't understand that at all either, because if your religion's not informing your politics, then your religion's not informing your life.
Right.
And it's like certain things are just very obviously, against God's plan, against God's will, and those work into your life, and that includes the way you vote and the things that you believe in. It's so weird that pastors are like, well, I don't really want to say anything about Roe v. Wade. And it's like, why not?
Yeah.
Like, why would you not reference where the Bible is like talking about these evil pagans who are throwing their children into the pits of fire and sacrificing their children to gods, and be like, yeah, this is the same thing. We shouldn't be doing that. But instead, they think that they can preach the gospel and also be wishy-washy on child sacrifices. Beyond me.
Yeah, it's very interesting that people are coming around to calling it what it is.
Right.
They used to kind of like shy away from that thing. You never used to hear it. And they'd just kind of be milquetoast about it. But now you see people all the time talking about it's like a form of child sacrifice. And that's like a very interesting cultural progression,
Yeah, I think it was a couple of years ago on one of my podcasts, I was talking about this. I was like, I used to think it was a little too heated of rhetoric to call it child sacrifice. I was like, well, it's not. They're not literally sacrificing their children to Moloch. Like, it's awful, it's evil, it's this. And I was like, no, but it is. They are. Like, and they tell you they are. They're like, well, what's her name? Heath Ledger's widow. She was out there giving an acceptance speech for an Oscar, saying, "I wouldn't have this Oscar if I hadn't killed my kid." So you're telling us you sacrifice your child for fame and for money and for things like that.
Yeah.
They're saying kill your kids for climate change. They're literally telling you that we are killing our children to appease the rain gods. But because we make it, scientific and modern, we think it's not this ancient pagan religion, but it is.
So many people on the right are doing it too, and this might be this is going to be unpopular. But even after midterms, Trump was like, "We shouldn't overturn Roe v. Wade because we could have won midterms." So what then? What?
Sacrifice the children to win elections is what that is.
Yeah, he also said that. He also said that the 6-week mark was too
harsh.
Too harsh to DeSantis or whatever in Florida. I was like, dude, that's weak.
The 6-day mark isn't harsh enough.
But the idea of, well, don't go too hard on these culture war things because then you won't win elections. At some point, you are just sacrificing children for political power. And how does that make, how are you any different from the left at that point?
Right.
Substantively.
Yeah. And this kind of ties into something I want to talk about that I wasn't planning on talking about this, but we might as well. It's a perfect segue. I am so happy, at least this is my impression through Twitter. So it's not real life, but it's a little subsection of real life. Christians seem to, or a lot of them seem to be kind of doing away with or shying away from being timid about all of these issues. And they're coming out strong. And I think a wave of that is gathering. And building momentum, that sort of thing. And I'm so happy to see that because I cannot stand this like weak, timid Christianity stuff. Like, I don't, what's his name? Andrew Tate. He just converted to Islam or whatever because he is so turned off by how weak Christianity
it's one of the few things he said where I was like, you're wrong in everything, but you have a point. He has when you're looking around and you're seeing what Christianity's become and you're calling it weak, he's not wrong.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
But I am glad to see that there's maybe a tide turning there a little bit,
I think you're right calling it gathering because I've been saying this for a while, but I really think that the sides are polarizing in a big way spiritually, where we've like everybody already talks about the political polarization. People are becoming harder left and harder right. I'm not sure that's as true as people think it is, but spiritually, I think it's absolutely happening. I think you're seeing on one side, well, you're just saying people are calling it child sacrifice, right? But so is the left. So are the people who are literally out there for the Church of Satan saying, this is a religious right of ours. We have to sacrifice our children to Baphomet. You can't take this away from us. So both sides are recognizing it what it is. They're either saying sacrifice your kids to appease the rain gods or to a Baphomet or whatever. They're Tim Pool basically just pointed this out in a really awful way, I think. I don't know. Like, I'm still trying to figure out if he's joking. It didn't come across like a joke, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think I commented on one of Abby's things on that.
Like, I was trying to read this going like, is he being facetious? Because like I don't know.
Do y'all listen to his show?
Sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think he's somewhat joking, but he's also being serious when he says that they're literally gonna like depopulate themselves by doing all of this.
I don't like this rhetoric for one. Like,
Let me read it.
Yeah, go ahead, because I wanted to comment on that idea a little bit.
So he said, every day the cultural divide gets worse. If we want to end the culture war, we have to compromise on abortion and gender-affirming surgeries. As the leftists sterilize and excise their children from society, the course will begin to correct itself. Once Moloch is satiated, our culture will heal.
Yeah, he's totally being facetious right there.
On the second one, but the first one, he's making a point that I think is being overlooked, and that is, and I've heard a lot of people say this, which is, well, why should we care if they're transing their kids? Why should we care if they're aborting their kids? Then there will be less leftists. And I think that that's such a cold take where you're trying to punish the children for the parents being who they are. And I don't think it's a good Christian take at all to be like, well, let's let them sacrifice their kids because then they won't grow up to be leftists. Yeah, it's gross to me.
I think that okay. This happens so much where somebody says something and then you call it out and people are like, oh no, he's just joking. He's just joking. But he didn't say he was joking. And sometimes I think that people hide behind that these days, where people will tell me, I'll go off on something Andrew Tate said and they'll be like, oh, Andrew Tate's just joking. I'm like, I don't think so. But I think so many people just kind of hide behind this veneer of unseriousness so that anything that they say could at any point, they could just be like, oh no, I didn't mean it.
That is the times that we're in though, right? I mean, this is like a feature of Gen Z.
Unserious culture.
Yeah, unserious culture where it's like you say something and you take it how you want to take it, and nobody takes responsibility for the things they say anymore. I've actually had a lot of deep conversations with people who really believe in this, and I'm like, I think you're wrong, because I think like even if you think like the 1% of your audience who's really, really gets you is getting your message, 99% of them are taking a very different message, and they might take it really far. And I think it's I don't know, it's irresponsible to me. I think just say what you mean, I guess. Like, I'm not against joking and stuff like that, but I think
never tell jokes.
I never tell jokes.
Yeah, it ruins the joke if you say just joking at the end, you know.
Right. Yeah. But
it also ruins the joke if everybody replying to it is like, yes, I seriously agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll hold on to joking with the platypus thing. I'm just going to keep saying that I don't think platypi are real, that they're cryptids. If you don't get it.
Yeah, call me crazy, but I think platypi are real.
Have you ever seen one, though?
I'm not in real life, but I haven't seen a Bigfoot either, and I think that they're real.
I think the Bigfoot's on paper, the Bigfoot is more believable than the platypus.
That's so true, though. The platypus is the most ridiculous sounding cryptid.
It's like if you'd never seen these things, and I said to you, do you think that there might be like a 7-foot tall ape-like man-like creature? And you're like, oh, gorillas are already most of the way there. Or if I said, do you believe that there is a duck-billed mammal that has what does it do? Like has the venom of a snake?
Yeah, it's got the venom of a snake in its back. We have just got totally off
mammal.
Yeah, it's talons, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah, it's got a spur.
Dew claw or something like
that. It's got a spur on its back, on its hind foot that is poisonous. It can deliver poison, and then it can get bioluminescent algae in its fur, so that it can be like glowing green.
Man, sometimes
totally
the truth
not
is
real.
stranger than fiction. You know?
Yeah. But back to the culture war. I like in Tim's tweet, whether or not he's being serious, he's like, if we want the culture war to end, we need to do this. And I don't think we need the culture war to end. The spiritual divide between good and evil is good. I think that we're coming out of a time of moral gray and confusion where people were maybe doing the right thing for the wrong reasons or the wrong thing for the right reasons. And now we're starting to really divide and winnow out, and people are gathering on either side. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Do y'all think this leads to just galvanization, or do you think it leads to like separation?
Well, I mean, it's always going to eventually lead to separation. Just thinking like biblically, like you're talking about the separating of the wheat from the chaff, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing too. So, yeah, I agree with Abby. I think it's a good thing, because I'd rather that. I'm just trying to think of how to say this. I think it's a good thing because I think it's making Christians stronger. The flip side of that is it's going to make the enemy stronger too. I think it's just inevitable. But the alternative is this kind of middle road where nobody knows what they believe. And this is kind of goes back to my belief that this is why I think atheism is going away. I don't think anybody on either side actually believes that nothing created us, nothing exists. You're just starting to see people get really strongly into either simulation theory or aliens or Anunnaki or demons. Like literally people on a certain side are starting to recognize the demons they are worshiping and call them out by name. And I'm trying to remember where I saw this, but I've started to see some of the transgender influencers just come out and say, yes, we worship whatever version of Asherah that they call her, Inanna or Asherah or Ishtar or whatever, because that's the god of transgenderism. So it's...
I didn't even know there was a god of transgenderism.
I don't know where I was going with this, but...
That's wild.
No, I think you have two options. Either everybody's just in the middle and nobody really believes in anything, and that's not a good world, or you have people who are coming out strong in their faith, and it's just going to inevitably galvanize people because nobody's ever going to be on same side until all knees bow, as it says in Revelation.
I think we are getting to the end. To maybe more fully answer your question of, I don't think that there's, I'm not sure I can point to a time in history where we have had a divide like this between good and evil, that's like so clear, where people are lining up on either side, explicitly on the side of God and explicitly on the side of demons, the way that we're kind of seeing it stack up now. And I think we're just drawing battle lines for the end.
Yeah, agreed.
I have 2 comments on this. I think it reveals fake Christians, for lack of a better term. I say that term every time, lack of a better term. But anyway, I think it's very revealing when these things happen, like when Roe v. Wade was overturned. You got to see everybody's reaction, and some of their reactions were surprising, Yeah. And then, what was the other one? I had one more point.
Can I comment on that point about the fake Christian? This is back to the reason why I think it's good, because when you're in that middle state, the churches are being led by people who don't believe, and people are teaching them false doctrine. So the more that we galvanize, I think the more that you're going to see the strong, real, faithful people leading. Whereas before it was like anybody's guess. You know what I mean? Like you show up to a church and you're like, I don't really know what this guy thinks or believes. And I think now that the battle lines are drawn, you're starting to see those strong, faithful leaders rise up and actually take leadership.
Yeah. So I want to go back to your study through Revelation a little bit. One of the things that I was listening to, you're talking about where we are in it, if we're in it, and both of you had brought up the seals and where we are on that. And one of the questions that I had, because I haven't quite gotten there in my study yet, is do you guys believe that the seals are pre-tribulation?
This is an interesting question to me, because I don't think that. Sorry, I think that people, when they talk about pre, post, and mid-trib and things like that, and they think that pre-trib means before the seals, I don't see any evidence for that at all in Revelation. And I know some people believe in pre-trib who I think are rightly at least pointing out that the seals are before any of that anyway. Like the seals are before the scrolls are opened. So I don't think that.
That's what I was asking. Just on the timeline.
Does that make sense, Abby? Or am I saying it right?
Yeah. So we're okay. So we think that a lot of the seals have already happened. That that the 4 horsemen were released directly after Jesus died on the cross, and that they've been doing their thing ever since. It never says that they stopped or were taken back up.
Or one happens and then the next happens. And
exactly. That they've just been
simultaneous.
World wars, plagues.
Also, I believe the martyrs one too, because specifically in the martyrs one, it says, a ton of people will be killed for the name of Christ, and then they'll go and before the throne and be like, are we going to start the end times yet or what? And he's like, no, wait longer. So to me, that feels like more confirmation that these 4 horsemen and the martyrs are something that's been happening since the time of Jesus.
But the 6th seal, with the sky being rolled back and all of like the crazy stuff going on, that hasn't happened yet, obviously. And then the 7th seal is the first trumpet, right? Somewhere in there's a moment in Revelation where all of a sudden there's a ton of people in heaven before the throne. I think that's where you have the rapture. Right. Because Matthew 24 is the human view of this whole time period, and Revelation is the heaven view. Like, what's the perspective? So, and the timelines line up on that.
Because I want to say that the trumpets are post rapture, and it's kind of a wake up call for whoever's left.
Right. Yeah.
That sort of thing, or last call sort of thing.
Last call. I like too that the seals are just really like the seals are holding something back. So when the seal is broken, something comes out. And then the trumpets are just heralding something happening. And it isn't until the bowls where God is directly doing something in judgment. Everything else is more passive to that point.
I love that you point that out, because you're right. The seals hold something back. The trumpets. See, this goes to my belief that I think some of the trumpets, and I could be totally wrong on this, but I think some of the trumpets, in the way it's talked about in Revelation, is God is announcing something that we've done to ourselves. So he already the seals are broken. Something that was held back is here. And then the trumpets, it's like when it says the sky is blacked out, I'm still thinking to myself, did Bill Gates get his wish and he actually like put that crap into the sky to block the sun for climate change? Like, is this something we've done to ourselves that God just allowed us to do?
It's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah, like I think it could be, yeah.
And so after this study, well, before and after, did you both have opinions on like pre, mid, and post tribulation rapture? And did that change after your study?
I feel like that's the question I'm still trying to answer. Yes, because I feel like growing up in the church, it was all that I grew up in. It was all, and with books like Left Behind, it was always pre-trib, was always the thing. But I feel like even if you take away the whole seals thing, which I don't think actually is what the Bible's talking about as far as pre-trib rapture, because I don't think that that's the same thing as tribulation. Then I could still believe in pre-trib, but I'm still trying to answer the question, I guess. It seems like there's enough verses that make it seem like we're going to experience X amount of things before a rapture, where I'm not like, I don't think we're going to be like taken out before any bad things at all happen. If that makes sense.
There's this idea it's either in Matthew 24, right after this timeline is given, or Matthew 25, but it's still right there, is a parable of the 10 virgins, where they know when and where to meet Jesus when he comes back. When they know where to meet the bridegroom for the wedding, but they don't know when. And some of them have extra oil and some of them don't, and some of them run out because he's late. And so I think that there's this idea in the church that it's going to be a certain amount of time, and it's not. It's going to be longer than that, and there are people who just aren't prepared for how long it's going to be, and I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Yeah, for sure. This has been my problem with the pre-trib ideology in the church this whole time, is we don't have to do anything because we're just going to be taken away. And I've seen this be taken so far as to say, well, I don't care if babies are being sacrificed to Moloch because I'm going to heaven. I know I'm going to be raptured, and I don't care if this thing's going bad because I'm not going to have to experience it. And first of all, it's such a selfish, childish view of like your fellow man and the people that God called us to love, that I think that's unchristian in and of itself. But if you're not preparing because you think that you're never going to experience any of the hardship, I think that's the 10 virgins with the 10 virgins with the oil parable. And I think it's pretty explicitly said, hey, don't just dawdle around and just hope that you got enough to get through. You actually have to be prepared for these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I need to go through maybe a mid or a post tribulation study just so I can get that perspective, because I have the pre-trib deal. Just because I think the rapture is for the church, right? So for this time period, the Jews were God's chosen people, right? Mm-hmm. And after they, acted out in disobedience for so long, he basically set them aside and said that I'm going to return to you guys to handle you guys. But for now, I'm going to start this new thing, which is the church, right? Mm-hmm. And so I've been taught that the rapture is for the church, and then the tribulation is to basically bring
the Jews back
to the fold.
I think so much of Revelation is about the Jews, and I think a lot of people misinterpret it because they don't see that God's trying to bring back his people to him.
Yes. It's we don't realize that so much of church teaching forgets that this story is about the Jews. It's always been about the Jews, and the only reason we're in it is to make them jealous. Like, that's it.
Yeah, I kind of got off a little bit at the end there because I was wondering how harsh I wanted to be about that. But all of those judgments are reserved for the Jewish people to bring them back to the fold, like you said. And I hesitated on saying that because I didn't want to be too harsh or like scare people off from it. But that is the truth of what it is, So maybe I need to research that other perspective a little bit before I
can I just ask this, because this brings up a topic that I find so interesting in conspiracy stuff, is like there's this whole thing around the Jews where it's like really hard for people to talk about, because on one hand you've got like the Nick Fuentes crowd, which is like the Jews are behind everything, they're the worst, they're terrible, they're everything. And then you've got the other side, which is like, don't say George Soros is an evil man because he's a Jew. And it's so weird because it's like, I wish we could have more honest conversations around this topic without it being one side inflammatory or the other, where it's like, and I think that's what we're doing here, but I guess what I'm just saying is it's a pet peeve of mine where it's like on one side, it's like, don't ever say anything about this person because they're Jewish. The other side is, oh, this person is Jewish, therefore this. And I don't know, I just find that frustrating, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think my hesitation was related to talking about Jewish people. It was more reserved for, or the hesitation was more about telling it like it is, because what's coming is scary, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know, so I don't know how far into that I wanted to go. But yeah,
it's to punish evildoers, and it's to bring Israel back.
Yeah.
As a nation, not that every single individual will come, but as a nation.
Yeah. Well, so I'd be remiss to not talk a little conspiracy while you guys are here.
Nice.
And this is the perfect segue because I think this ties in very well. I want to talk a little bit about Project Bluebeam because
never heard of her.
Yeah. Because when the rapture does happen in Revelation, one of the things that people may not think about is all of the people left on earth, the people that are still in power are going to have to explain where all of these people went. And so I've always wondered, like, how are they going to do that? And as I got older, I found Project Bluebeam, and I was like, man, that might be the perfect explanation for this. So what do you guys think about that?
Yes.
Well, actually, first, can you briefly explain Project Bluebeam for people who may not have heard of that?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a government. It's really a UN thing that was kind of brought to light by a guy named Serge Manasse in the 90s. And the idea is that they are going to fake signs and wonders and things in the sky to bring people into a one world religion. So there's a lot of different aspects of Bluebeam. And it's an interesting subject because I think it's a little bit of everything, and I think people are probably all getting it a little bit wrong. I could definitely see Bluebeam being used in a way to, like I said, bring people into this one world religion idea, to get people to believe that it's aliens. And the one part where I think that maybe it's being talked about wrong is one of the parts that Serge Manasse talked about was this idea, and I'm not saying it wasn't a plan, that they would fake the second coming of Christ, and they would use basically holograms and projectors and things like that to do it. I wonder if the fact that people know about it now, that when the rapture happens, they'll assume that the government snatched up a bunch of subversives and are blaming it on the second coming. So I think it's actually maybe a psyop in that way. But yeah, I do. I think
they don't know that
part
we
of
know
the Great
that we
Deception,
know.
right? Yeah.
Are y'all Friends fans?
No,
I've seen
not
it
personally.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember almost. It's one of those shows you can watch and then like not remember the majority of it, except for like a handful of jokes.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully someone out in the audience will understand that reference. It's the they don't know that we know that we know.
That we know.
But yeah,
was what I was saying making sense, or what's your
yeah,
thoughts
for
on
sure.
it?
Yeah. And another thing that I found interesting, and I think this was y'all's podcast that I heard it on. You had mentioned that not only are they going to do these signs and wonders in the skies and fake all these things, fake like an alien invasion, because what better way really to bring together the whole world against this one thing? Like you need a common enemy.
Uniting.
Yeah, to unite everybody, right? So it's uniting under a one world government and one world religion, right? And monetary system for that matter.
It's all of it, yeah.
Yeah, or currency, yeah. But one of the things that you had said that I thought that was interesting and I had never heard before was, on top of all of this, they're going to fake, well, not really fake, they're going to bomb different things with drones that are up in the holograms or something like that.
Yeah, it's,
And I
it's
thought that was super
basically
interesting.
Mysterio in
It's
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man
Yeah.
2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, okay, don't even get me started about Marvel movies. They're not good anymore from a movie story standpoint, but when it comes to conspiracy stuff and all the stuff we've been looking into, now every time I watch a Marvel movie, I'm like,
This
holy
is so
crap.
funny because we have these times where things are like shown to us, and I think this is God working through a lot of different funny ways. Things that are shown to us that we didn't know we needed to find. And me and Abby the other day, it was probably a week ago, she's like, PJ, you have to watch all the Marvel movies. I know you say they suck after Endgame, but you got to watch them because of the conspiracy stuff we cover. So I'm like, okay. So I started Shang-Chi. I didn't finish it. I had to go to work. And the next day we did a podcast. And at the end, we started talking about like Cthulhu, Eldritch Horrors. And I was like, there's this topic keeps coming up and its relationship to Gnosticism, and I need to understand it. So after we had that conversation, I turned back on Shang-Chi and it ended with a bunch of Eldritch Horrors. And she didn't even remember that they were in there, but it was just so funny. But I think you're right. I think the Marvel stuff is really hinting at some things. They've got Blue Beam stuff in there, MK Ultra stuff in there, Paperclip.
It's starting to be explicit.
Yeah.
It's starting to be not even hints anymore, but just like I watch Wakanda Forever, and the whole time I'm like, how is this everything we've been talking about and looking into? Because my big thing is like the pantheons and all the old gods and just going by the same beings going by different names throughout history. And
that's where Marvel's at right now.
Marvel is like the main bad guy is like a combination of Quetzalcoatl and Hermes, with the wings on his feet and everything in Wakanda Forever. And it's like,
well, and then in the end of Ant-Man 2, they literally show you, hey, here's this one guy, and throughout all of history, he's gone by different names of different gods, and it shows him as Osiris. It's really weird.
Marvel is doing, in our culture today, what the ancient myths did in Rome and Greece. It's telling the stories about the gods for the religion that they want you in.
Yeah. They're reviving the pantheons. And this is the other thing we talk about a lot, too, is like, everybody's noticing the same things. This is what it's so weird because we'll notice something and we won't know that other people are talking about it until other people who watch our show bring it to our attention. Like, hey, did you know that this other person is saying this and saying this? And it's like, everybody's recognizing that the gods are coming back. Everybody's recognizing things about Blue Beam. Everybody's recognizing things about whatever it is that we're talking about. And they're just, the Nephilim is a huge one too. And it's like, they're all, and there's different sides in this where it's like, we've talked to people who, and it's been like, here's what Genesis 6 says, and here's all the evidence that it's real. And here's the tomb of Gilgamesh that they found. And Gilgamesh is obviously the same character in history as Nimrod. And then they'll be like, well, it has to be the Anunnaki. It can't be the Nephilim story. Or it has to be aliens, or it has to be simulation. So it's just that rationalization of trying to find anything to explain away God is still happening. But even in that, everybody's recognizing the same players are on the field.
So y'all are of the thought that the old gods that they're referencing are actually Nephilim? Am I making that connection right?
I think Watchers or fallen angels. Yeah. So the Nephilim, because we try to get this right too. The Nephilim are the human animal hybrids, or the human angel hybrids.
So you're talking about the
fallen
gods
angels.
of the fallen angels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's even more apparent when you realize that Hercules is a Nephilim. For instance, Hercules is the son of Zeus with a human woman, right? So the concept is still there in Greece.
Mind blown.
Right. It's in all of it. I mean, Gilgamesh.
That makes perfect sense.
Gilgamesh is a Nephilim.
I just had the light bulb go off. Okay.
And Nimrod is a Nephilim. Gilgamesh is a mixture of gods and human. So all of the people are talking about the same thing.
Percy Jackson.
Yeah, the gods. Yeah, I'm reading Percy Jackson now. You finally got me to do it. I'm like halfway through the first book.
Yes. No, it's the concept of gods mating with humans and producing a mighty human superhero type thing is throughout cultures. And one of my rules of thumb is that if there is a myth that's in all kinds of different cultures that didn't ever talk to each other, one's in South America,
like
one's in Africa,
flood.
one's in Yeah, then the myth is probably true. So anytime you have giant myths are everywhere, flood myths are everywhere, demigod myths are everywhere. The pantheons are so similar anywhere you go.
What about dragons?
Oh
Yes.
yeah, dragons
Yes,
exist.
absolutely.
How did every single culture have the same idea of flying lizards?
I
And
know
they're
whenever
not
she
real.
said that, that's where my mind went with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Dragons, vampires, a blood-sucking type demonic creature.
Yep. Werewolves, Yeti.
Yep. Those
Yeah.
some big hairy creature in the mountains. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are everywhere in a way that it's really difficult to ignore. And it doesn't have to, I think the thing that I come down to is that it doesn't have to be exactly as the story is described for it to be real. Sometimes you're like, okay, there's a kernel of truth here. And then there's just like a lot of urban legend around it. You peel that back, and whatever's still at that core that's in all of these cultures and in all of these stories, and all of the indigenous people groups tell the same story in completely different spaces. That thing is true.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also interesting to point out, like with Greek and Roman and stuff like that, my belief on it is that they're true, but it's also the gods are directly the demonic gods, the fallen angels are directly telling these Greeks their story. So you also have to realize this is filtered through their lens. You know what I mean? It's the same as Gnosticism. Gnosticism is the idea that yes, God did create the earth, and yes, Jesus came down and all this stuff, but that guy that gave him the fruit, and he was trying to give him knowledge, he's the good guy. So they're telling the true story, but it's from Lucifer's perspective.
It's an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Well, y'all have given me a lot to think about. It's interesting that, you know, in the example of Hercules, that he's regarded as a hero, but he's a Nephilim.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is the demonic gods' version. They're making themselves heroes, or to be feared at least. And that's an interesting thought too, is like these different gods have different ways of trying to get themselves to be worshipped. Either it's like a total authoritarian, like be afraid of Zeus or I'll strike you with a lightning bolt, or it's I gave you guys fire, shouldn't you love me? I gave you farming, I gave you, you know, all of these things, or I'll bribe you with sex or whatever it is. So
I have one for you. In the Bible, it talks about a god called Dagon that the Ark of the Covenant just completely defeats. That the Ark of the Covenant gets put into the same temple as Dagon, and it makes the Dagon statue just fall down, and the head pops off, and everything. God just completely annihilates this god. You never see this god again. You never see Dagon worship again after this moment. But you see Baal worship, and in that pantheon, Dagon is the father of Baal, and in their story, Baal defeated Dagon. Baal's the one who killed his father.
And
Dagon.
Baal is the same as Zeus, and Zeus defeated his father, the Titan.
Yeah, his father, Uranus. I'm sorry, Saturn. It's Saturn.
Saturn.
Yeah, his father, Saturn. Is it Saturn or Uranus?
No, Zeus is Saturn.
It's
I'm
Uranus.
so sorry.
Yeah.
The whole. I'm good with Greek mythology. It's Roman mythology that screws me up.
So in all the pantheons, there's a sky god, and then there's a storm god. And in every single one, it says that the storm god killed or somehow defeated the sky god. But in the Bible, God defeated Dagon, and then Baal took credit.
Man, mind blown.
It's so fun. I love it.
Yeah, and you know, going back to different ways that they get you to worship them, you know, I'm still thinking on the Hercules thing, but you know, for him, it's like people admired his strength, so it was like worship through admiration, that sort of thing.
The word in the Bible for these people was Gibborim, which means mighty men. So yeah, it makes sense that Hercules would be looked at in his culture as a mighty man, especially if they're worshiping those demonic gods instead of being warned against them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Man, I'm trying to process all this. I have to compliment you guys' recall ability.
I think
Y'all
we're
have
in
a
it.
very good recall.
We're in it so much, and we talk all the time about this stuff. So yeah, sometimes I feel like my recall is crap, but I think we just talk about it so much.
What he's
Yeah.
saying is we're very good at going completely unhinged
Yes.
in just an overwhelming way.
Well, this is a unhinged podcast for
There we
sure.
go.
That's the way we
I
like
don't
it.
believe in the hinged.
Good.
So we'll use that as another segue. PJ, I asked you if you would mind talking, if y'all would mind a little talking about MK Ultra. I've had several guests on that kind of, it's not on purpose, but have been building a arc of why you should not be trusting the government completely, that sort of thing. And MK Ultra is a perfect example of that. Can you talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about don't trust the government. The thing that we've been pointing out with MK Ultra, MK Naomi, and all of these Project Stargate, whatever, is there's always a good excuse. And this is the thing that I think people don't realize. I think we've seen it echoed, but people don't realize it till it's too late. COVID-19 being a perfect example of this, where it's like, well, if they're going to do this, right? The Russians are trying to mind control us, or the Japanese are trying to attack us with chemicals and things like that. That means that we have to fight them by any means necessary. And I think that's the way that people need to understand the CIA is they might in some ways be, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. They're trying, I think in their minds, they actually are trying to protect the homeland, but they are doing it no morals. Like there's just none at all. So what about MK Ultra did you want to get into, I guess?
Well, for the people listening that have never heard of that, can you just
So
start
MK
from the
Ultra
beginning
was
on
a
it?
program created by the CIA in the 1950s, and it started with a few projects because I always shuffle these things around. That's the important thing to remember. It started with a Project Bluebird, and then it was Project Artichoke and all these things, and eventually they brought on this guy called Sidney Gottlieb, and he purchased the world supply of LSD, and they did all these insane tests to try to mind control people. Essentially, it started off with like, how can we get come up with the truth serum? How can we get people to talk under torture better? And then it became there was a book, Manchurian Candidate, and they became obsessed with this idea, like, what if we actually could create someone who we can flip a switch and get this person to become an assassin? So it went from how do we be better interrogators to how do we literally mind control people into doing what we want to do. And the tests are just insane, dude. They gave LSD to everyone in the world. Like they were obsessed with the idea that LSD was the key for a lot of this. And then it became like, how do we dump somebody's memories out with like shocking them and torturing them till they're an empty shell and then filling them with what we want to fill them with. And eventually the CIA there was this thing called the Church Commission in the 1970s. And they were like, the CIA's been doing some stuff that the taxpayers don't know about, and they're probably not happy with. And it all was spurred out of the JFK assassination, which is funny that gets left behind. Is in like the commission that exposed the CIA was started with JFK, but yet people still believe JFK was just killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. And they closed the program down for the second time because they closed it in 1963. But it was still running. So they closed it again in 1973. And we're supposed to believe that even though there's this long history of them finding ways that worked to actually mind control people, brainwash them, and they had shut it down and reopened it so many times that we're supposed to believe it's just gone. And that since 1973, they've never tried to essentially brainwash people and turn them into assassins or whatever.
The context for this that I think can't be understated is that we were in the middle of the Cold War, and there was this idea that the enemies we were fighting were so evil that we could just do literally anything and it would be okay in our pursuit of a way to defeat them. And so
The ends justify the means. Sort of thing.
We did some evil things.
Yeah.
From Operation Paperclip to bringing all these Nazi scientists over.
That's how all these programs worked. None of them would have worked without Paperclip. Whether it was, the different UFO programs that we started, or MK Ultra, or MK Naomi, or any of these evil programs, they had to literally bring in the worst of the worst people from World War II because the Russians were doing it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Abby. I was just...
Oh. Yeah, it was just... as I think there's so many people on both sides of the aisle who are like, actually, I think I see it more on the right, where it's like, well, these people are so evil. No matter what I do, it's okay.
Yeah.
And that's just the wrong way of looking at things.
One of the wild things about it was, I don't know if this was at the very beginning, but one of the ways that they got participants was they had was it a fake brothel that
so that was a little
they
later.
drugged the John Does in.
That was a little later. That was called Project Climax. Or no, sorry, Operation Midnight Climax.
Midnight
And
Climax.
they set up a brothel in San Francisco because San Francisco is a testing ground for a lot of this stuff, and it's making me understand San Francisco a lot better.
Yeah,
I
no
believe
doubt.
this is where they tested the gay bomb and where they started AIDS. I'm not joking on that. Like we know for a fact that it MK Naomi stuff there, and they like sprayed the city with chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, so with Midnight Climax, they hired prostitutes, said, we'll get you off whatever charges for being a streetwalker. As long as you sleep with these John Does, let us film you, let us record you, and slip them LSD. And they were testing out the idea. I don't know if you've ever seen Red Sparrow.
Yep.
Yeah, they were testing that out in America in the 1960s or something like that. The memos that have come, the declassified memos that have come out about that particular project are probably the most telling of just how evil they were. I wish I had this in front of me, but the guy was like, the guy in charge of it was basically like, this was the most evil thing ever and the most fun thing ever. And he was just going on about how wonderfully fun it was to abuse these women and drug these people and do all these terrible things. It's probably the most evil sounding memo I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, and it's crazy because we still have the label of conspiracy theory on a lot of these things, but they're now declassified. Like these things actually took place. And like if you're listening, that's kind of the point that we want to get across is some of these things have actually been declassified and they did happen. So they're not conspiracies anymore,
Yeah. I found the quote, by the way. It says, I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. This is a guy named White that was in charge of the project. And he goes on to say, where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All Highest? That's a direct quote in a memo from a CIA operative in charge of Operation Midnight Climax.
Man, that's wild.
Yeah.
Another thing that was connected to MK Ultra allegedly was Charles Manson. People theorize that he was a subject of MK Ultra, which kind of makes perfect sense.
There's a lot of famous test subjects. Ken Kesey was a test subject. The Unabomber was a test subject of MK Ultra. Charles Manson. Who else? There was a lot of them. Whitey Bulger was a test subject of MK Ultra. Because they would take these people, some of them were in Harvard, right? So like the Unabomber was going to Harvard at the time, and they pulled him out and tortured him for over a year. Like they would just shock the living crap out of him, drug him up, and then make him, just do all these terrible things like brainwash the living crap out of the Unabomber. I didn't look that deep into the Charles Manson one, but I think it's confirmed that he was a test subject of MK Ultra to some extent. Whitey Bulger was in prison and they started giving him LSD. Like they forced him to take LSD the whole time he was in prison, and he talked about it. So yeah, I mean, that's maybe one of the worst parts about it is there was willing subjects, but most were not willing to, like, obviously with what they're trying to figure out, how to brainwash people. Like who wants to volunteer for that if they actually know what it is and I say willing, like, they were told, some of these people were told they're testing a new drug, but that's about all they were told.
Yeah, that's wild stuff, man. Well, we're running out a little bit of time. So something I do want to ask you both briefly, what is your favorite conspiracy theory?
You can go first, Abby.
Oh no. Okay, I promised myself whenever we did this in an interview, I would say, well, there's this insane cryptid in Australia, but we already did that bit, and so now I have to actually.
Now I have to know.
PJ, can you go first? Well, I think.
Oh gosh.
Oh wait, by the way, this shirt is also for y'all. This was a shirt that I got for the Taylor Swift concert that I went to with my wife. And so I know that y'all did a Taylor Swift episode. So
Yes.
That's amazing.
I love it so much.
Maybe I should just make that my favorite conspiracy theory, that Taylor Swift is actually Xena LaVey. Or is it
She's not. She's not a clone of Xena LaVey, but she wants to be.
She's modeled her whole self on
Yes.
that. But favorite conspiracy theory, I know everybody's going to tell me to say, expect me to say Project Bluebeam or something. But I mean, it kind of is for a few reasons. Like, I really think that there's a great deception coming. It's talked about in 2 Corinthians. So my whole thing, it's not just Bluebeam, but it's just trying to understand the great deception that's going to get people to believe and worship aliens, I think. So whatever that looks like, I think it's happening in a lot of different ways. Simulation theory is one of those things. It used to be multiverse theory was kind of the thing that was used to try to explain away God. Now it's simulation theory, but none of them actually answer the question at its root of the unmoved mover. So I'm just looking out for the great deception, I guess, for the deception that's going to get people to fall into the one world religion. And I'll say this too, when we first started talking about Bluebeam, it was because of the Raelian episode. And I don't know what it was this week that made me think about this again, but that guy that runs the Raelians, this Claude idiot, this total moron, I'm realizing that more and more and more of the stuff that he's talking about, he's not smart enough to come up with the stuff that he's talking about, and how well it lines up with Gnosticism and how well it lines up with all these other basically incursions of these demonic gods. And he says that he met them on a mountaintop. And every time you talk about in the Bible or anywhere else where it's like these angels came down there, it's always to a mountaintop. So I think that people are being manipulated into the worship of demons through aliens and through all these other things. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at. Like, that's the thing that I'm most interested in continuing to look into.
What about you, Abby?
Okay, I guess that my favorite one right now is that the tree of life still exists, and that it is, because it was never, the Bible never said it was destroyed. It says very specifically that an angel was set to guard it, and that angel is traditionally Uriel, and
With the flaming swords?
with a flaming sword. And it never says it was destroyed. There's an assumption that it was destroyed, and there's very little mention of it at any point. It's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, so very ancient literature, and you can see it in art, ancient Sumerian art, of this tree-looking thing with an angel over top of it. So we know that it existed and that it was written about in pagan myth. So I think it's still real. I don't know where it is. I don't know exactly what it looks like, because I'm not sure if it's like a literal tree or something that, like, tree was the best word you could apply to it.
Right.
And but you see throughout history, people have been pursuing eternal life through knowledge. You have alchemy. People have been pursuing alchemy. People have been pursuing this through like your secret societies, a hint that they're carrying
Adrenochrome,
some sort of,
whatever.
yeah. The Holy Grail, adrenochrome, all these different ways that people pursue eternal life. And you see
even through like biotech and
Yeah.
AI stuff.
Yeah.
exactly.
Peter Thiel's like really searching for a way to live forever.
Yes. That's what the conversation centers around now. And but there's also a lot of talk of psychedelics and kind of how that links into knowledge and the way that psychedelics are described when people use them as like climbing this tree of life and exploring the branches and meeting beings in the branches, and that's how people talk about it. So just this kind of weird way that these two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, have gotten conflated, but have continued to impact our philosophy and our culture and our myth for all of these years. And I think it's Chekhov's gun. I mean, the tree of life has been sitting there since Act 1. Nobody ate from it. I think somebody will at some point.
Can I add on to something you said really quick that I just thought of?
No.
You said that most people think it was destroyed in the flood, but what I find interesting about that is if Gilgamesh did go and see this tree of life, which I believe
It's
he
after
did.
the flood.
It's after the flood, and if he's Nimrod, it just makes all this so much more sense. So I agree with you. I do not think that it's gone. I think the Bible never says it was.
So if it's still here, would it be underground?
There's
People think it's in Antarctica or in the Vatican, or there's a lot of.
there's a couple different. There's the idea that it's under a lake somewhere, that it's covered in water, that it's in Antarctica, that the Vatican because the Vatican has everything. Yeah, there's a couple different places it could pretty easily be, but.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Do y'all listen to Rogan at all?
Sometimes, yeah.
Well, he talks a lot about him and his guests, I guess. They've talked a lot about like LSD and like the trips, that kind of thing. And then they see like these like purple entity guys or something like that.
The machine elves.
And yes.
Yes.
I do want to ask y'all a little bit what you think about that, because the only thing that I can figure on that is like that's demonic to me. And you're like opening up another like a pathway for that to like enter your mind, sort of thing, or enter your life.
Let me put it this way: if it's all just chemical and impulses firing in the brain because of these drugs you took, that does not explain group hallucination. That's just not a thing that science can explain. So the fact that 10 people can take an LSD trip and they'll all see the same praying mantis god in front of them, science doesn't explain that. I think it's very clearly demonic. I think it's.
So I'm not the only one.
No. I think it is. The Bible talks about opening up your spiritual eyes. So it's like Elijah, right? He opens his eyes and he's able to see the spiritual realm. I think people have found a counterfeit way to try to do that exact thing. And much like the knowledge of good and evil that they were not supposed to partake of, this is that thing.
Our culture gets psychedelics from shamanistic cultures. So the root of this thing, where it came from, understood that it was deeply connected to the spiritual world, that the shamans would take these drugs with the intent of meeting with these beings and meeting with their ancestors and getting knowledge and getting counsel.
It's also in Black Panther.
Yeah.
Talking about stuff in Marvel. Sorry, go ahead.
It is. It was in Wakanda forever. But like a lot of things in our culture, we've taken it and we've divorced it from its spiritual meaning, and we've said, okay, well, this is just a plant, this is just scientific, but people still talk about it so religiously. And Rogan is one of those who is almost religiously preaching this thing, and the way that he talks about it is like, it makes you a better person. No one should hold office if they haven't had a psychedelic trip. This is what has made cultures advance, because they're given new technologies through their trips. And it's like, are you sure you don't think this is
Rogan's
spiritual?
very religious in this. Like, that's the thing, is
religious.
people try to cover up when they're religious, but everybody's religious about something.
Yeah, that one thing that I forgot earlier that I just couldn't remember, whatever. I was going to say that the people that don't believe anything and they claim not to believe anything, more often than not, they worship the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just you're always worshiping something, whether you know it or not. And if you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping something else. And a lot of the times it ends up being the state, and that's kind of why you're seeing, the way that the country's going right now.
The most hardcore of the atheistic left believes in in a spirit being born into the wrong body. If that's not a spiritual belief, I don't know what is. So yeah, I don't think anybody's actually an atheist.
Well, on that note, we'll end it. Guys, you want to shout anything out? Do any plugs?
Yeah, so if you guys want to check out our show, go to conspiracypilled.com. That's where all of our links are. We do the full show on Rumble. We're also on, we have a locals channel and Rockfin and Odyssey and all these things. All those things are conspiracypilled.com, so you can catch our full weekly show Wednesdays at 7. And then Thursdays at 7, we do our bonus behind the paywall unhinged content, which I think is fantastic. I'm honestly, our last episode, I want more people to see it. It was so good. So yeah.
Next week, we're doing the Challenger explosion and why NASA's lying about everything.
Ooh, sweet. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you for joining. If you are not subscribed on the YouTube or the Twitter, go ahead and do that. be looking out for the foil hats on Conspiracy Pill's merchandise part of their website. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.